So thank you for joining us for another webinar organized by Princeton for everybody worldwide. Today we have Jean-Pierre Landau with us from Sciences Po, and he will talk about who is afraid of US stablecoins. Hi Jean-Pierre.
Hi Markus, nice to be here.
Good to see you. And we're looking forward to talk about stablecoins today. I will have two opening slides and then Jean-Pierre will take over and tell us everything who is really afraid of US stablecoins. And of course, there's certain candidates who could be afraid of it. One is the existing financial system. Stablecoins can actually be a catalyst to improve the US payment system. It might force some digital tokenization. The finality of payment will be immediate and it might be more programmable. So it might be also benefit Silicon Valley over Wall Street. So there are certain winners and potential losers. There might also be foreign countries and foreign central banks which are afraid of US stablecoins. In particular, if they have inefficient payment systems and if they have weak currencies or a weak institutional framework compared to the United States. And it might also be that foreign debt offices, government debt offices might be afraid because the stablecoins create additional demand for US T-bills, short-term US government bond. And that substitutes them for missing seniorage. The US benefits about 50 billion given current interest rates on cash seniorage. And that might create an additional seniorage for the US Treasury, potentially at the expense of some other finance ministries in other countries. But there might be many more who are potentially afraid. So before we go into that, and Jean-Pierre will outline his vision, let me just outline some cousins of digital money. So the stable coins, then we will see potentially tokenized deposits, not the existing bank deposits, but tokenized. We might see tokenized money market funds and also central bank digital currencies. And there are some differences across the spectrum. Of course, stable coins by the Genius Act should not pay any interest, so 0% interest rates. Tokenized deposits can pay interest and money market funds might even pay more interest on it. But there might be difference in finality of payments, and there might also be difference in know your customers and anti-money laundering regulation. So the final column here. Stablecoins might, according to the current law, might be treated equally, but they also might have some advantages in this regard. Okay, so with this, I want to conclude and give the floor then to Jean-Pierre, who can then outline his vision and the threats US stablecoins have, or also the big benefits for a global payment system. Jean-Pierre, the floor is yours. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Markus. It's again very, very nice to be here. I think you presented a very comprehensive synthesis of the answer to the question. And my job there is just going to develop that a little bit from a policy and analytical perspective. The first thing I'd say is we had already a project of global stablecoin 6 years ago. It was called Libra. And Libra was killed by the regulators and the monetary authorities, basically because it was denominated in its own unit of account. It was a true full-fledged currency, and at that time seen as a threat to monetary sovereignty, and rightly so. Now the projects, which have been spearheaded by the Genius Act, are in dollars, and they are backed by very, very stable assets. So the whole issue is reopened again, and the question of the disruptive, positive or negative effects of global stablecoins is raised again. So maybe we could look at what is exactly tokenized money. Okay, sorry. This is the outline for the presentation. It has 7 points. Basically, we look at the situation. That's the first point. Then we look at the monetary and financial stability, international impact. That's the 3 other points. And we'll conclude about some strategic dilemma for the rest of the system, as Markus has mentioned. So it's very important, I think, to understand the real revolution that tokenized money is going to bring to the financial and monetary system. Until we had digital token with sufficient proof and value to be trustable, we had the choice between currency and deposit money. And currency is an object. We can do it peer-to-peer, anonymous, no trust is necessary, but it's a physical token, so we have to be face-to-face. If we want to go far away, send money cross-border or on this side of the street, we needed deposit money. So we had that trade-off, but deposit money needs an intermediary. It's not anonymous. It is subject to a lot of regulation, and therefore it's not exactly the same as cash. We had that sort of trade-off and dilemma. Either we wanted peer-to-peer object and we had to be close, or we wanted to go far and transfer money far, and we had to go through the banking system. What the tokens bring, they are digital objects moving on the internet, is to get us free of that dilemma. And we can have peer-to-peer, anonymous, no trust transactions, very far away at a distance. That's the big advantage of tokenized money. Of course, there are two big questions, the kind of infrastructure and ledgers which support those digital objects. We don't deal with that today, but this is a matter for intense research. And second, of course, how do those objects get value? How can you trust the value of a digital object on the internet? And that's the problem that stablecoins try to resolve. Now, they are not the only form of tokenized money. And as Markus mentioned, they have competition in terms of tokenized money. So it's very important to look at the monetary underpinning or the monetary architectures which support digital tokens. Now, on the left-hand side, you have the Bitcoin, which is supported by nothing. It's a pure fiat digital currency with no backing at all. One row on the right, you have what Markus mentioned, the tokenized deposits, which are basically tokens which mirror the balance of your bank account. So tokenized deposits are a way to use bank money, just like is a debit card or a transfer or the check used to be. But of course, it's a much more practical way, and it's a much more flexible way, and it can allow you to send money very far away, bank money very far away, without going through the whole system of interbank relationships. So these are tokenized deposits. You have e-money. It's often called differently, but it's e-money. So the idea of e-money is that you have one single issuer with one huge bank account, and that bank account is demultiplied in a multiplicity of tokens that people can hold on their mobile. So, of course, it's a bank-based. E-money, you still have a bank account at the base of the system, but you don't need to have a bank account to be a participant to the system. You can have tokens of your mobile without having a bank account. And that's basically the system which is very well working in Kenya, for instance, with M-Pesa, or a system which also resembles very much the one that China has with WeChat and Ant Financial. The system works based on a huge synthetic bank account, aggregate bank account, but you don't need necessarily to have a bank account at the individual level. And then you have a stablecoin, which is a token, which is not based on a monetary asset, but which is based on a non-monetary asset like a security or a government bond or another bank account. So you can have a bank account supporting the stablecoin, but you can also have non-monetary assets. So you can see that the last two columns are potentially is important, a way to start transacting without having a bank account. And of course, one selling point of tokenized money under that form is that they help financial inclusion, because you can have a financial life without being banked. And in many parts of the world, people are not banked in huge proportions, and that's certainly a matter of enormous progress, as Markus mentioned, for their economy.
How would the concept of a wallet come into play here?
So a wallet is just an application that you have to download on your mobile, and that application records the digital token you hold. And I'm very happy actually that you asked the question, because a wallet is not an account. A wallet is a wallet. With an account, you hold the liability of the bank. You are a creditor of the bank, and even a privileged creditor of the bank. So you are in a relationship of credit with the bank, of claiming with the bank. You are a claimant of the bank. With a wallet, you have a record of the tokens that you hold, and that's it. That's it. Now, of course, those tokens are recorded into a ledger, but a ledger is not a balance sheet. It doesn't give you a claim. Being recorded on the ledger doesn't give you a claim on anyone. So it's an object-based system. It's not a claim-based system. So it's very important to understand that distinction, because that creates a lot of new issues about the values of those objects.
So Olivier asked, if you don't have a bank account, how can you acquire the tokens?
M-Pesa, you acquire them through cash. And so, of course, you have to bring some money into the system to get the tokens. At the moment, it's a perfectly valid question. And even the Chinese, they replenish their mobiles of WeChat and non-financial with their credit card, that is, with their bank account. But in the future, you can think of getting all your life on your mobile, financial life. You can get your salary directly on your mobile through tokens. You can get your welfare payments by tokens, and a lot of emerging countries are now thinking of sending the welfare payments directly on the token. So you can have a financial life without a bank.
Absolutely. A wallet instead of an account.
It's a wallet, yes. It's your wallet on your mobile.
Let me ask you about Libra. You mentioned initially, and also Diem. How does it fit into this category here? Would it fit at all? Or
I think, no, Libra was on the right-hand side of the table. It was a global stablecoin.
But it was not really pegged to the dollar. So it was not a stablecoin.
No, it was pegged, and it was not even denominated in dollars. It was denominated in its own unit of account, which was, I think, a big mistake. The people who developed the system at that time, I told them, you will have the central banks very much against you, because the unit of account is the source of monetary sovereignty. We'll come back to that in a minute. So if you have a network with 1 billion people who start counting and paying in a unit of account which is not an official currency, you're going to run into trouble. So the current generation of stablecoins, which are going to be helped and regulated by the Genius Act, are dollar stablecoins. So the assets which are backing those stablecoins are all denominated dollar assets.
Very good. But then Diem, which was a successor of Libra from Facebook.
Diem was just a payment system. Just was the payment system, the wallet precisely, that they tried to develop to use Libra.
Finally, the anti-money laundering regulation and know your customer regulation between a wallet and a bank account, is it very different or is it very similar?
Well, actually, I'm not a specialist on AML, but AML, all the AML system right now, as I understand it, is based on the bank account. So you basically monitor and filter and force the bank to be accountable for the transactions that they are doing. And that's the big benefits from the public regulation, to have intermediaries, right? And of course, stablecoins don't have that. And cryptocurrency like the Bitcoin on the left-hand side of the table don't have that. So it's a major source of concern. It's part of the concerns that public authorities have regarding those new instruments.
Good. Thanks a lot. Let's move to it.
Okay, so if we go now to the situation, if you open the newspapers, you will see that the stable coins have now a huge importance. And there is around like between 250 and $300 billion outstanding amounts of those stablecoins. Now, what that graph shows is that there are only two basic stablecoins existing right now in dollar. There's the Circle, which is an acronym of USDT, Tether, and Circle USDC, right? And Tether is actually, as you can see from the graph, it's in red. It's the majority of the circulation.
But still more,
and those stablecoins.
If you think about the total cash outstanding or total nominal claims outstanding, it's tiny now. 250 billion.
Yes, it's tiny, but it's been growing very fast. You're right, but even that number doesn't mean much, because these are the currency which are basically, as you title, confined to the crypto ecosystem. These are the currency that people use when they exchange on platforms, when they participate to the DeFi financial system with automatic contracts on loan, mortgage guarantees, collaterals, swaps, and all this is done inside the crypto system. And the currency which are used to pay are very fast-moving coins, which are the two stable coins. But at the moment, in terms of monetary instrument, they have absolutely no impact on the economy outside the ecosystem. So the big question, of course, is now that we have the Genius Act, and that the Genius Act, as we will see, gives them an enormous credibility in terms of instruments, because it imposes on them a list of requirements which are very sensible, which are enumerated on these slides. I won't go through them, but there are requirements on composition of reserves, which is extremely important. So we are finished with the period with stablecoins like Tether could have a real estate as asset or commercial paper as assets. Now they have forced to have very liquid assets, basically only bank accounts or short-term treasuries, all in dollars, of course. They have transparency requirement, they have licensing requirement, and they have designated supervisors in the law, which can vary according to different criteria. So these are now a very sound regulation. Two remarks, nevertheless. This is not as extended as the project which was issued by the Treasury 2 or 3 years ago, a working group of the Treasury, which basically wanted to regulate global stablecoins as banks and force them to have capital requirements and liquidity ratio. So it's very serious, it's credible, it doesn't go as far as previous projects of regulation. And second, as we shall see, the crux of the matter, of course, is how can you get back your dollars when you hold the stable coins, the redemption rules. And as far as I understand, the redemption rules and the Genius Act are very strict in principle, but the modalities are not specifically designed or specified. And in that matter, of course, the devil is in the details, as we have seen with the money market funds. The rule of redemption of money market funds can be either a factor of stability or huge instability, and I suspect for the global stablecoin, if they prosper, it will be the same. So that should be certainly a matter of, if not concern, at least big vigilance, how those global stablecoins are going to establish their rules of redemption, whether there will be gates, whether there will be delays, whether it will be instantaneous.
But is the problem that I cannot sell the T-bills, the underlying T-bills, quickly enough? Let's suppose the redemptions of the stablecoin of several $1 billion, and suddenly the issue of the stablecoin is to sell all the T-bills, and it takes a day or two to sell the T-bills. That's the problem. Exactly. But once we tokenize the T-bills, actually we can sell the T-bills probably faster too, I guess.
That's a very interesting question. Whether tokenization will increase the liquidity of the T-bill market. I would acknowledge this is a very important question. Whether I'm able to give an answer yes or no right now, I'm not sure.
Because it will, of course, increase the speed of everything. But if the stable coins are very fast, you can interact in milliseconds, while the underlying T-bills, you take 1 or 2 days to sell them to get the money from the sales. That's the tension you're referring to.
This is an issue that I would not engage with you because you know 1,000 times more than me. But the question whether automation brings liquidity, I think it's a question we still have to settle.
There's another question from the audience. So it's a prohibition to pay interest, so the interest rate has to be 0%. What's the rationale behind that?
I think the rationale is that you don't want it to be a store of value. You want it to be a payment instrument. That's the first rationale. The second is much more mundane. I think the banks ask for that to make sure that it was not unfair competition. And that was certainly a point which ensured that the banking community in the US would be supportive of the Genius Act, which they were. And you could see that because there is a way for the crypto community to circumvent the no interest rules. The platforms would hold those stable coins, and they would pay interest on the deposits that they have to hold those stable coins. So that's an indirect way to pay interest on those stable coins. And it has triggered recently, according to press report, a very strong reactions by the banks because they thought it was not the deal when the Genius Act was concluded and adopted. And so this big question, we see that at the end, how the banking system is going to adapt. It's even more burning in Europe, but it's clearly not totally settled in the US.
So Christoph from the audience says, oh, it might also be a legal reason because if you pay interest, it's counted as an asset or a security, and you might be fall under the realm of the SEC and things like that.
Yes, the Holy Act. Yes, it might be. I'm not familiar with that sufficiently. I can't remember the 2 or 3 criteria for designing a security by the SEC. But it might be a justified remark, yes.
So I was wondering, there's a question by Renato, whether you will also go into Visa MasterCard issues later on as well, whether they're already using some stablecoins in the background. You are arguing stablecoins are mostly used within the crypto environment. Do you see it as for the stable MasterCard and credit card?
I've read the reports on that. So I could think of 2 ways that Visa and MasterCard could be involved in this area. The first one is to help tokenize deposits, banks' deposits. And the second one is to build their own stable coins, which could be transferred through their debit cards. So in that case, they would not be very different than the global stable coins created by Amazon or created by X. We can see very well through that question that most likely those who will be attracted to create a global stablecoin are entities which already have a huge network, either a commercial network or a social network, or in the case of Visa and MasterCard, a payment network. And in that case, of course, you can be ensured that you immediately have an enormous amount of acceptance inside your network of the new payment instrument.
And you think it has to be a global network, or is a domestic network would be enough? Was it more like Silicon Valley, or is it more, more?
No, it should be large enough to have a network effect of money. So tens of millions, 100 millions, like that. That was the big, actually, danger of Libra. You could have 1 billion people using it immediately, and in synergy with the other activities of the network.
Okay, so let's go to the big question. So
yes, so actually we have anticipated it a little bit. Okay, does it make sense to take those instruments which are now limited to the cryptosphere and to bring them to the general public? So 3 points there. The first point here is, of course, for businesses, it does make sense. Having a stable coin, moving either as an interbank instrument. At least tokenized money makes a sense between businesses. It's pretty clear all the central banks have projects to tokenize the reserves. And so to have the daily transaction and reserves between central banks on real time done by moving tokens. And of course, the problem of value and the problem of trust is totally absent there. So it's a much more efficient way than having to credit and debit accounts, even electronically. So the banks are going to do that. We discussed that and we wrote things together, Markus, about the supply chains to the extent that will survive the current trade environment. But in a supply chain, having your native stablecoin and be able to move money at the same in parallel with the movement of goods and services. You invoice, you get paid immediately, and then you settle at the end of a period with bank money. That is extremely attractive. Okay, so for businesses, I see a case for tokenized money. Whether, remember the second slide, whether the tokenized money will be bank-based or not bank-based, I think we still have to think in terms of business term. There will be a huge competition. If the banks are smart, they will issue those kind of instrument. But it is a concern actually it should be a concern for regulators, central banks, because you will have some kind of closed circuit stablecoin network, which may not be immune to financial or stability shocks. So, and no lender of last resort in the circuit. The second is the household.
Can we jump in and ask for the businesses? Franco asked a question, does it make a difference whether it's a private or public blockchain? So the blockchain element, is this important? Whether everything is public or it's private? Yeah.
I seldom use myself the distinction between private and public. Either it's centralized or decentralized. So permission, either everybody can write or everybody can read or everybody not can write and read. So in my view, the most business-like friendly blockchain is a blockchain where a few people can write but everybody can read. And if the governance is very well made, and we still have to discuss the consensus rule, how the transactions are approved, but if a few people can write, it's actually a centralized blockchain. But it can be centralized in the operation and fully decentralized and transparent in the monitoring. I think this is an extremely powerful instrument to managing complex situations in a full transparency. And very flexible because you can decide on the number of people who can write on which part of the blockchain, we cannot.
So in particular for some industry platform, they can run this blockchain on the side among themselves.
Yes, exactly. If you have a supply chain with 300 participants in the world, shipping companies, textile companies, a part company, everybody can know the state of the system at any single moment, including the past, because the blockchain is a sequential ledger. So that's an instrument of automatic and implicit coordination, which is very powerful.
Yes. So I disrupted you. We are talking about households next.
No, the household is pretty clear. I mean, I think you said it in your introduction. The household will go on a stable coins if it's competitive, monetary speaking, with against other currencies. So, as we shall see later, it's pretty clear a dollar stablecoin may be an instrument on dollarization in countries where dollarization is a temptation, right? So the household will get there if they are not very happy either with their banking system or with their monetary management, or if there is no bank. Okay, so if there is no bank, if you have a population which is 60% unbanked, like in some sub-Saharan countries, you have a broadband system going on. All these people have mobiles everywhere. Everybody knows that. So maybe global stablecoin can play an enormous role there, even if you don't have a banking structure. So it's going to be a supplement to banking or to money when it is insufficient from the point of view of household. The big question, of course, that we have in Europe, whether the stablecoins will prove competitive in Europe. And that will be a competition between, of course, store of value, but essentially efficiency of payment. And if we don't come up in Europe with very fast cross-border instant retail payments with question about privacy and anonymity, there will be.
I have two questions from the audience here. One is about Europe. So Franco asked, there are very few euro stable coins. If you want to do the same thing as the Genius Act in Europe and it's backed with T-bills, a stable coin, do we need a European T-bill in order to have some European denominated stable coin? Is this a problem that we don't have European T-bills?
Well, we could have a synthetic portfolio of European debt. It can look very much like the ESBs that you are promoting. And on that synthetic portfolio, it would be synthetic in the composition, but the securities will be stored somewhere. So you have a portfolio of government, diversified portfolio of government bond, and you could issue a stable coin on that basis. And of course, I didn't put it because it might be too disruptive in the current framework. But if one day we want to have a private DTS, that's the way to do it. You can have a DTS stablecoin, so global DTS stablecoin. Some operators buy the currencies in the right proportion, store there somewhere, and issue a stablecoin which is denominated in DTS. I'm not sure that would be viewed as friendly by many countries, but that could be done.
So there's another question from Jerry. He refers to the PIX, the Brazilian PIX, when we talk here about households. Are the usefulness of the PIX shows how big the advantages are, and can this be translated for stablecoins in other countries which don't have a PIX system? We had earlier a webinar on PIX with the former governor of the bank.
Yes. I think that's a very different structure, and that's a different system. So what the PIX does, as I understand it, is provide a sort of common infrastructure, which is shared by the banks, by the non-banks, by the payment service provider. The novelty, as I understand it, is that you can access the infrastructure without having a bank account. You have to have a wallet. That's where the distinction is very important.
Many people also have bank accounts. The bank accounts are very well connected.
If you have bank accounts, it's okay. But it substitutes to, I think it was called the Bonero, I can't remember exactly the name, but you have this system of tickets with prepayments for people who were not banked. So households who were not banked, they would give cash, they would get those tickets, and those tickets were prepaid, and you could pay everything. Now PIX is substituting to that. So it gave access to digital money to people who don't have a bank. But it was not done in hostility with the bank, it was done in cooperation with the bank. So the paradox, of course, is that in this question of retail digital payments, the big emerging economy, like India and Brazil, are very much ahead of advanced economy. And the reason, of course, is that they don't have this kind of legacy infrastructure that we developed and which are purely bank-based in our economies.
Now we go to the issuer. We have the businesses, the households. What's about the issuer?
The issuer gets a senior edge. That's the direct advantage. And of course, the senior edge will depend on the level of interest rates. So it might be huge, or it might not be enormous. Circle, who is managing an outstanding amount of less than 100 billion, is making huge profits this year. Several $1 billion of profit. So senior edge is not totally out of the question, but it's uncertain. It depends on interest rates, and since it's invested in short-term securities, the amount of senior edge can move up and down very quickly. There are indirect effects that you yourself underline very much in your papers, Markus. It would consolidate the network. It would consolidate the platform. It would make switching out of a network very, very more costly than before. So a money like stablecoins associated to a network contribute heavily to the consistency of the network.
So Olivier asked, what are the equilibrium implications if the issuer can keep the interest rate between 0 and the T-bill rate? Do you expect the size of the stablecoins to issuance will be much bigger when the interest rate is higher and smaller when, let's say, the policy rate is 0 and the T-bill rate is 0, then I don't want to issue so much. Do you see that?
Yes. That would be a sort of normal reaction on the basis of a simple model. I think the rest will depend on the business model of the issuer. If the issuer is only motivated by senior age, then they can do it. It also depends on their ability to control the amount of money around. Crypto community has discovered something recent. The last year. It's very easy to issue money, but it's more difficult to destroy money. If people don't want to hand it to you, you have to go to some kind of open market operation. Whether the existing network managing stablecoins will have that capacity, it's doing open market with millions of customers, I'm not sure.
So Simon asks some questions, how do they compete if you can't compete on the interest rate? Typically there are 2 issuers or 3 issuers saying, I offer you a higher interest rate compared to the other one, but we can't compete on the interest rate. Where do you expect, which dimensions they will compete on besides convenience of usage or?
They will compete on the efficiency, yes, of payments, certainly. They might want to compete on the laxity of controls. Nobody knows. But this question shows that it's not absolutely 100% sure that those kind of big global stablecoins will develop. Again, the business model is not that clear right now. The Genius Act gave them that possibility, clearly. It did not. It gave us a minimum guarantee in terms of integrity of the system, but it did not ensure by itself the viability of the business model.
What's perplexing a little bit is that when the central bank raises the interest rate and the T-bill rate goes up, the issuers would have an incentive to issue even more stable coins. So money supply is actually increasing at a high interest rate environment. So rather than tightening the economy, you loosen it.
Isn't that true for bank credit as well?
Yes, to the extent the bank deposit rate is not moving with the policy rate.
Yes. So that's part of the complexity of the monetary transmission channel, isn't it?
Okay. Perhaps we can move on to the next item.
Yeah. So there's a whole debate which has been rekindled on the stability of private money, right? Because these are private money. So maybe we can move right directly to the financial stability issue, which is So it's kind of very frequent and useful in the community to try and attach the stablecoins to an existing instrument and existing animals. So I've listed there the main comparisons which are made usually by academics or even by prudential regulators. Early on, they've been compared to money market funds. Okay. Now, it's pretty clear it's not the case for those global stablecoins which are emerging from the Genius Act. Neither on the asset side, maybe a little bit on the asset side, but certainly not on the liability side. They aim to have more liquidity and more instantaneity than the money market fund. And the money market funds are not supposed in all cases to guarantee the value anyway. The second, of course, comparison, which has been made by some of your colleagues, Markus, recently, is that they are akin to private banknotes issued by banks during the free banking era in the middle of the 19th century in the US. And that is not absolutely accurate as well, to the extent that those free banking banknotes were backed by assets which were very opaque, very obscure. Nobody could check the balance sheet because of physical distances. Nobody could check the balance sheets of the banks. So there was a lot of information sensitivity in those banknotes that the current stable coins are not plagued with.
And they were also trading at different discounts. No, some were not as valuable as the other ones.
Yes.
They were not really stable.
There were information.
Stable coins.
Yes. And then you have the narrow banks, and I think maybe today the project of narrow banks, which were banks not making credit, but just so-called, to speak, liquefying high-quality assets, holding government bonds, depending on the maturity, but issuing deposits. That may be the most accurate description of what's going on right now. And you could summarize the project of global stablecoin as it is now, a sort of tokenized narrow bank.
So far, the Fed was not really encouraging the setup of narrow banks. They actually prohibited many initiatives of people who tried to set up a narrow bank and did not allow.
Yes, I know what you mean. I never fully understood the reason, but yes. And I have no idea what is the opinion of the Fed on the global stablecoins. I'm not aware of any kind of public consultation that they have given on that.
It might be politically anxious
I may have missed
at the moment
it.
to get into this space. But narrow banks could offer higher interest rate than zero, I guess.
I mean, there has never been purely narrow banks, but yes, in theory, yes. But again, I don't think it's substantial, referring to the previous question that stablecoins yield a zero interest rates. It's the compromise, political compromise to ensure their acceptability.
So can you imagine that in Europe, if there would be a euro-denominated stablecoin, they would not go for zero interest rate, just to make it more attractive compared to the US stablecoin?
It will depend on the legislation. We won't have time today to discuss the MiCA legislation, but I'm not sure it's totally adapted to face this new environment.
So Simon asked a question, how, in terms of stability, how would you compare stablecoin different from a currency board? Let's say in Hong Kong. It's also backed by dollars. I guess it's not backed 100%.
That's an apt. A currency board is back 1%. Yes, yeah. That's a very apt comparison. But my idea of a currency board is that the redemption is instantaneous, because on the currency board you may have few securities. It depends on the regulation of the currency board. But the asset side is really the claims on the Fed or on an American bank. If you do a dollar currency board, right? So you can redeem instantly. And of course, a currency board is passive. You have to issue money when you get the dollars. You have to destroy money when you have capital outflows. It's a passive stablecoin system. The issuer has no power on the amount issued. That's the idea. That makes the domestic monetary policy, monetary aggregate, totally passive, depending on the flows of external capital flows. Here, I can imagine that the stablecoin issuer would want to have some discretion on the amount of stablecoins it issues. It could refuse to issue stablecoins if it wants, which a currency board cannot do. Otherwise, it cannot keep the peg.
Jerry is asking a question for stablecoins to ensure that they're 100% backed with T-bills or bank deposits. Somebody has to regulate and supervise them. There has to be some bank supervisor going into stablecoin issuers.
Yes, there is. Yes, I think the controller, my understanding, the controller of the currency in the US would be the main supervisor for stablecoins. But I seem to have understood, of course, the legislation is complicated to interpret, that there might be other regulators. And it's in the culture of the US system that no regulator has a total monopoly on the sector. But my understanding is that the controller of the currency will be the major regulator of stablecoins.
So we covered financial stability. Let's move on to...
Yeah. So, of course, in the past, you can see they have not been really stable, right? And that's because, of course, the redemption rules are not as airtight as they should be. If it was as automatic at the currency board, as we mentioned, the redemption rule would be, you wouldn't have this kind of fluctuation. So that is, of course, used by the people hostile to stablecoins to show that they will never stable. But those stablecoins whose variation you see here are not the one envisaged by the Genius Act. Tether, in particular, had a lot of assets which were absolutely illiquid. And therefore, when it was facing redemptions, it could not meet immediately the redemption needs. And that is part of the reason for those fluctuations. But it's true. This graph confirms what I said a few minutes ago. Everything will be in the details of the redemption system.
Do you expect Tether and Circle to convert to comply with the Genius Act subsequently? And
yeah, they have to. They have to, and there is a transition period for them. I don't know exactly the details of the transition period, but my guess is that in a couple of years they will have to have a balance sheet which meets fully the requirement of the Genius Act.
The fundamentals.
Yeah, of course. Let's look at the animal a little bit from an analytical perspective. Okay. Actually, we already anticipated that a lot. First thing is that backing is different from being liquidly redeemable at site. So you can have a system which is fully backed. You can have a balance sheet which has a positive net value and still be totally liquid. We know that. So again, I'm sorry to repeat myself, the details will be in the details of the redemption. And that is going to be extremely important. Of course, banks are affected by the same liquidity mismatch, but that's why they have the central bank. The central bank is there precisely because solvency and liquidity do not coincide in all time. And of course, stablecoins don't have the central bank. So that question of liquidity and ability to face redemption is still there. And it has not been dealt with precisely with the Genius Act. There are principles, but again, I think everything is not the detail. So going a little bit further,
but do you think the central banks will be pushed into that if there is a run on a stablecoin and the stablecoin issuer has a lot of T-bills, but it takes a day to sell it off or two? I guess it will be very hard for this Fed to say, okay, no, we don't help out, we don't provide a limit of cost.
No, of course they will. Every time, I think history shows that they feel a great responsibility for the stability of the treasury market. So every time the treasury market paralyzed, most recently in March 2020, they intervened.
Yeah.
I could not resist put the parenthesis on independence, because of course, a central bank which is fully independent can clearly stabilize the debt market without being suspected of monetizing the debt. A central bank which is less dependent, that's a big question mark. These are the same instruments to monetize the debt and to stabilize the debt market. So you have to be very careful on that. A brief on a singleness. I just made an experience and made a search. Suppose I have a USDC on an Ether blockchain, and I want to send it to a Solana blockchain because I have a transaction with someone who's on the other blockchain. That cannot be done easily at all. Okay, so you have decided that a coin is a coin, but actually in the current system, the different blockchains are kind of closed and they interact very, very difficultly. So actually what I have to do, I have to take my USDC in the Ether blockchain to destroy it and instantly to recreate on the Solana blockchain. That proves we are not in an account system. We are in the token system, but the token cannot move between the closed system. That, in my view, is a big weakness of the current system. You have to get special apps, special bridge, special wallet to make sure that you can do it. If global stablecoins become accessible to the general public, that is going to be a big question. What are the public and what are the regulators going to require in terms of interoperability between the different systems?
Can you also imagine there might be a third party who builds a bridge between two different stable coins?
But it has to be instantaneous. Here, the system tells you openly that it might take 15 minutes to move from one blockchain to another. So, and actually the whole logic is, of course, to make that switching very costly. This is the logic on the network. And for instance, the WeChat system, you have your money on WeChat. If you want to take it out, you can get in free, but if you want to take it out, you have to pay a fee. So the interchangeability of those networks is clearly not spontaneous, and the incentives are going to the other direction. So if I had to supervise a new global stablecoins going to the general public, this is certainly one of the issues I would watch extremely closely. Now, monetary policy, of course, people, when you talk about stablecoins, is it going to affect monetary policy? Right? And then you have this paradox, because what those instruments are doing is changing the form of money. They don't even change the quantity of money. They just change the form of money. So even if you think the quantity of money matters, and a lot of people think it does not, but even if you think it does, the form should not matter for monetary policy. So the first order response is no, they don't matter for monetary policy at all. Then you move to a second order, and then this is the next slide, and then you see that monetary policy can only be conducted if you control the unit of account. Then if you control the unit of account and you have all the works by Woodworth and so on, then you can fix the interest on that unit of account because it sees your liability as a central bank, so you fix the interest, and then you control the real interest rate in the economy if people use that unit of account to price their credit or their goods. And that's how monetary policy works. But you have to control the unit of account. And in most monetary policy treaties and analyses, this control of the unit of account is taken for granted. And in practice, at the moment, most advanced economy, all advanced economy, they control their unit of account. How do they control the unit of account? They control it by controlling the medium of exchange. They have legal tender. You have to pay your taxes in the domestic currency. So you have to use it for, you are compulsory to use it for certain exchanges. But the whole system rests upon the coincidence between the medium of exchange and the unit of account. So new medium of exchange, denominated in different unit of account, could destabilize the control of the central bank of the unit of account. That's what this dollarization is basically. Dollarization is not that people pay in dollar, it's that they start counting in dollar and they start getting credit in dollars.
But would you say it's enough if the wages are still paid in the foreign current, non-dollar currency? Or
yes, but it's a question of critical mass, right? At some stage, if a merchant has 70% of her business in a foreign currency, they will not take the exchange risk. They will ask the wage earner to take the exchange risk. It seems to me. And anecdotally, I have some Chinese students, and when they go to some Chinese restaurant, they pay with their WeChat application, which actually is moving renminbis between their bank account in Beijing, right? And sometimes the invoice is denominated in renminbi. So we have pockets of Chinese monetary area in the center of Paris, you know. It's anecdotal, but you can see how it could develop.
Yes.
So the impact of monetary policy is linked to the control of unit of account. And doing a little bit of science fiction, if you have a technical system which is so performing, or if you have a domestic currency which is so fragile that people want to move to a unit of account, and they could move it for reason of convenience or for reason of stability, then you are in trouble. That's how these new forms of money can indirectly affect monetary policy.
But if I put in my Hayekian head a little bit and say, okay, it might be good to have some competition, in particular if we move to a world where, because the institutional framework is getting weaker now, then there is a competition between different digital currencies, and this way we keep inflation in check.
Now, if you are Hayekian, you are very, very, very happy with those technological evolutions. There's no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt. Or if you live in a country with financial repression or exchange control and high inflation, you are very happy as well.
So it makes financial repression much more difficult, and given the high debt level we face, you know, it's not unlikely we will have a lot of financial repression coming up in the future.
It's sure, and the IMF has published papers 2-3 years ago. It makes exchange control much more difficult. I'm not technically, I don't have the technical expertise, but when you see bits crossing the borders, identifying those bits with a capital flow rather than something else may be very difficult. That's the fascinating. But I think the important thing is not to think, in my view, not to think of the impact of monetary policy as a direct impact, but this indirect impact of the control of the unit of account, which is the definition of monetary sovereignty.
So what's about the international monetary competition? We touched it already a little bit.
Yeah, we touched it. I think the interesting thing is that the Genius Act is a materialization of this administration's vision of the international role of the dollar. They don't see the dollar as a store of value. And actually, some part of them think, and Mr. Miran, who's probably having his confirmation testimony right now, part of them think the reserve status is a drawback because it brings capital inflows and appreciates the dollar. But they still want the dollar to be dominant, and they still want people to contribute to the funding of the US deficit. This is the next slide. And then and that's what they want. And so a big network of dollar stablecoins attracts savings abroad to fund the US deficit because the reserves are invested in debt. And it fits very well the new vision of the dominance of the dollar, which is not based on its reserve status, but is based on its ability to attract funding to the US debt through network effects and network digital effects. This is pretty clear. So I made a quote. There is a photo of a quote of the White House website which explains that very, very clearly. It's here, and they say it's a very strange sentence. It will strengthen the reserve status of the dollar to have dollar stablecoin. So the reserve status is not defined as a store of value. It's defined as the ability to fund the US debt through the power of digital networks. That's a shift of vision, very clear. And I think implicitly they assume that this power will protect them from the macroeconomic fluctuation. And it will create a sort of structural demand for US debt, which will be largely independent. They will mine the liquidity yield, if I can be a little bit pedantic, and it will be independent of the fiscal situation of the US. Now, the drawback of this vision, of course, is that I personally think there is no rival, including now, for the dollar as a store of value. But if we enter a world where digital networks compete with each other, then the game is open. Other countries could have digital networks which are extremely efficient in terms of promoting payments and their currency. First of all, China. So the moment the US leaves the field of competition through store of value and move into competition through digital networks, they expose themselves to a competition that they didn't have before. So, and I don't know whether it will materialize or not, but it may happen.
Europe into the mix of this debate because Landau asked about the CBDC and digital euro. In a sense that, US has a lot of digital networks and China has a lot of digital networks and big companies. Europe doesn't. So is the strategy for Europe very different? And is the digital euro a justification to prevent the digital dollarization or remediation?
To be grossly oversimplified, I think the authorities in Europe are very much aware that great part of the domestic credit is made by banks. And the banks have rather clearly made clear that they would not welcome a system which would not be bank-based for payment in Europe. They are accepting and pushing for a modernization of retail payment system through SEPA, instant payments. They are all bank-based. Okay. But anything which is not bank-based, which would be purely token-based, like a global stablecoins, they are very reluctant. And I think they expect that the regulators will block it. And that's the reason why they're not really enthusiastic about the digital euro. Because if you're not in competition with stablecoins, with non-bank entities, maybe you think the digital euro is not absolutely necessary. And the reason why, there are many reasons why the ECB wants the digital euro, it is because precisely they anticipate that at some stage maybe you will have non-bank actors. And those non-bank actors, if I hold a private digital euro by a stablecoins, if I want to run out of it, staying in the digital world, I have to have a public digital money. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very problematic and unstable. That is, in my view, the reason for the ECB. And so you have that big, very discreet but intense battle right now of what kind of payment system we will have in Europe and how fast we will move to token money, knowing that if we move too fast to token money, it will open the way to Euro stablecoins, absolutely. And they have semi-allies in this battle because the credit card company, which are US, but make a bulk of the cross-border retail payment in Europe, of course, are very also happy to have the current system going on. And there have been a huge, enormous amount of legacy investments in the current system. So that is an extremely interesting debate for Europe, which is going right now. And I read this morning a press dispatch. It seems that the discussion at the European Parliament on the digital euro are very hot, actually, and that now you may have a strong opposition some opposition to the creation of the digital euro. Very interesting.
So, but do you expect the digital euro to be rather a catalyst for the banking system and the financial system to get the act together, and the European Payment Initiative, the private sector will then suddenly improve the cross-border payments?
That's what I would advocate. Yes.
Rather than the
I think on the one side,
replacing private banking.
Yeah, the digital euro should be the pillar of a system. The banks should leverage their access to the central bank balance sheet, which is their monopoly. They should, of course, negotiate how a shift between the different monetary systems would not affect their funding. And I think the central bank does know how to do that, whether they want to do that, but they know how to do that. They have published papers. I think this would be very smart from Europeans, and we could really have a European payment union, which we don't have. And in my view, in the short run, for sovereignty in Europe, it is as important, if not more, than the capital market union.
So we have to soon come to an end, but I think now we have the big picture.
I think we said everything.
We touched already between central banks and banks.
Yeah. We touch. So you have a nice strategic game which can be represented by a triangle between the big tech, the authorities, and the banks. And in a triangle, the always question you ask yourself is who's going to make alliance against whom? Right? The banks are resisting in Europe the digital euro because they don't think the big tech will be allowed by the governments. I'm not sure. If the big tech come with, if they are European big techs and they come with very attractive payments, they may be allowed by the government, and then the banks would find themselves in a very difficult.
To what extent are US big tech stablecoins a threat to the European banks?
There may be. There may be. I think we are not entering a period where the monetary policy of the Europe will be less credible than that of the US. So on that ground, of course. There is no worry to have at all. But on the efficiency of the payment, it's still a reality today that the majority, a huge majority of cross-border retail payments in Europe are done by American companies, with the data going to the US. Whatever we say about the privacy of the data and the GDPR, that is the reality. And I think 4 years ago, the German Chancellor and three ministers, we quote that in our report, 3 ministers of Nordic country, they wrote to the Commission and said, data is the new currency. That is not accurate, but they understood that the control of the payment and the control of the data has clearly as a clause.
So Adrien would like to know more about what you mean exactly by European Payment Union, because that's a new initiative you're putting on the table. Can you specify what does it imply?
So well, very, very briefly and concretely, you had something which is called the European Payment Initiative, which initially had a project of joint European credit card, underpinned by all banks. It has been abandoned. Okay. Now you have a project of a joint European app, which is tokenized deposit, basically. So you would have an app which gives you access at your deposit, in whichever bank it is, and allow you to pay with tokenized deposit to another deposit in whichever bank it is.
Wero, W-E. Yeah.
That's the Wero, exactly. But it's moving very slowly. It's been in the trying phase for 5 years. Obviously, this is an enormous project in terms of infrastructure. But here I'm speaking personally, I have no privileged information. There is no big push or big enthusiasm behind this project. Okay? And at some stage, the authority might want to get in and push it a little bit more. That's what I mean.
So I think perhaps you can, the last slide, the strategic dilemma for banks.
That's we dealt with. We just commented on it. We went for it.
Okay, so then I would like to thank you a lot for illuminating all of us, and I would like to thank all of the listeners for listening and hopefully subscribing to our channel, the YouTube channel. It would be very great, and I would appreciate it. Helps us to get more viewers. But a big thank you to Jean-Pierre for explaining everything very in detail, what's at stake and what the future will bring in the payment system.
It's fascinating.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.